Hello and welcome to Thread Sketching in Action number 78. I'm Deborah Wirsu of deborahwirsu.com. All this week I've been hankering after doing something different to my usual fare. So for Thread Sketching in Action I decided it was time to revisit the architecture theme that I've touched on once or twice in the past. It's not a particularly difficult technique, at least the way I do it, but it's also not something I've ever felt very proficient doing, so it's good to practice. Using a photo of a Russian city as inspiration, I've created my sketch and transferred it to the fabric, and now I'm simply stitching over the design, trying to maintain as few breaks in the stitching as possible. However, there are inevitably times when I need to stop and start in order to create the shorter strokes and lines. By running the video fast like this, you're able to clearly see how I move from one section of the picture to another, many times backtracking over the same line of stitching, sometimes several times. As long as you're using a fairly fine thread, there really won't be any major issue with too much build-up of thread on some of the lines. And in fact, it can be used to some advantage if you want a particular line to appear more bold than others. I guess it's a bit like switching to a bold font when typing and you want something to stand out visually. From a purely practicing point of view, stitching over drawn lines and backtracking over existing stitching is very good training for hand-eye coordination and following a set path. This thread drawing is worked on a piece of blue hand-dyed cotton fabric. I wanted some colour in the background, but not so much that it would overwhelm the colour I plan to add later. Perhaps you noticed at the very beginning of the video that the finished piece has also been painted. If you want to have a go at something like this yourself, it's always good, when preparing your initial drawing, to remember to simplify, simplify, and simplify again. I have a terrible tendency to overcomplicate things at times, certainly when drawing. The first sketches for this were so detailed and complex that they would have been a nightmare to stitch. But by redrawing several times, each time leaving out more and more detail, I finally got it to the point where I felt it would be practical to stitch. This probably took me 4 or 5 attempts at simplification. I can be a slow learner sometimes. With the stitching complete, the drawing could have been left just as it is. It's really quite effective. But I really did want to add some colour, so out came my pencils and brushes, and I got to it. A lot of Russian architecture is brightly coloured. Such an exciting scene, and so different and seemingly exotic to anything we have here. I didn't colour at all, as I felt that would be overdoing things. I just wanted to reproduce some of the highlights from these actual buildings. So with just a few splashes of bright colour and some hints and suggestions elsewhere, it didn't take long to totally transform the appearance. I think both the painted and unpainted thread sketches are effective, each in their own ways, and each would suit different situations. This technique need not be limited to scenes of buildings. Just about any subject matter can be interpreted with simple outline stitch and a bit of colour. Thanks for watching once again, and I'd love to have you join me in one of my popular online classes. You can check them out at www.learn.deborahwirsu.com. Until next time, bye for now.